All right, so I'll give you the next, 30 minutes if you want to go over that. I will mute my audio.
I'll set a little timer for myself.
I'm collecting bets for the over and the under on that actual time, Micah.
Thank you, Allison.
Love you.
Hello, so can everybody see me?
We can see you, Micah.
All right, sorry. As you can see, my son, he broke my tiara, but I managed to find a smaller one, even if it's not as good. So I have a few things to show you. It's all sort of hastily put together. You'll have to forgive me. I thought I would tell you about what I've been working on most recently. So this is the freshest of the freshest stuff. One of the things that I've discovered is that when you start doing one thing, then you figure, well, no, you have to do another thing, and then you have to do another thing, and then another thing, and another thing, and it keeps on going. And so this is an expected goals model, and it's not what I meant to make when I sat down to work. So what I sat down, and I should say just before I really get started, after seeing all of that cavalcade of elite athletes talking just before me, I should tell you, I can't skate, but I did put on pants for this talk, so that's up from recent standard. So so what I've been looking at with expected goals is what I really wanted. What I wanted was I wanted to isolate shooter talent and goalie talent. And it's not so straightforward. And in particular, it's not so easy to figure out exactly which goalie is having which impact, and which shooter is having which impact. And so one of the things you need to know, the most basic thing you need to know, is you need to know how difficult is every shot. So the people have been saying, you have to be careful too, right? Because people have been saying to analytics nerds like me, not every shot is the same, ever since people started talking about Corsi, which wasn't the point about Corsi or shot measures. The point about shot measures was to try and measure what people were doing deep in their own zone, trying to measure the impact of taking hits or clearing the puck, or by measuring it against something concrete in the future. Or we moved the puck up the ice and we got a shot, so we must have done something right ahead of time. But of course, treating all shots as the same, like you do in something like a Corsi model, that something basically just a plain shot model, it doesn't tell you anything useful about shooters, doesn't tell you anything useful about goalies, for whom the specific details of the shot going on are a lot more important. And so obviously people who know my work are familiar with the so-called brightly colored blobs of shot rates, which show the rink and show where shots are being taken from. But I'm discovering that even that has a lot of limitations for actually discovering who is shooting the puck better than you would expect and who is saving more goals than you would expect. So the whole structure of what I'm going to talk about is an expected goals model. But what I was interested in the first place was shooter talent and goalie talent. And so at the end, we're going to cycle back to some of those things. So first of all, the key idea, and for this I have to thank Michael Schuckers, who sort of took an idea a small idea I had and really focused my attention on it and said, you really have to make sure you get this part right. And he was absolutely right. And the point that he was making is that the geometry of the shots is different depending on what kind of shot you're taking. So I decided to model the geometry differently. So the most obvious pieces of the geometry, which I had in my most recent model, the one that this is replacing, was how far you were from the net, which obviously matters a great deal, and how much of the net you can see. It's nice to be nice to be reasonably close to the net, but if you're right along the goal line, you don't have anything to shoot at. So this is more flexible and more subtle. So I gather the wrist and snapshots together. The league occasionally distinguishes between the two of them. And in fact, statistically, there's almost no distinguishing between them though. So I've gathered them together, just like the tips and the deflections. Tips are supposed to be the way the NHL does it, from your own team, and deflections are supposed to be from things that aren't your own team, like the other team. But those are also statistically indistinguishable. The star and the wraparounds are special. We'll see why later. And I should say this is all NHL data. I don't have the data that I need to do the same thing for other leagues. And I don't know enough about other leagues to know what I would have to change. Although in principle, somebody who knew enough about the right kind of league would be able to do this all over again with only slight modifications as appropriate, and you'd be able to get something good for that. So the key idea is, instead of looking just at distance, to just segment the ice up into what I'm calling fabrics. That's why I use the word fabric in the title. So those are the positions, the hexes for wrist shots and snapshots. And so the ones I chose, so I just made a hexagonal grid centered on the net, like you can see. And then I just decided to include the hexes where in the last 10 or 13 years, where most of the wrist shots have come from. So those hexes collectively cover 96% of all of the wrist shots that have been taken. All situations, regular season, all the wrist shots that have been taken in the last dozen years or so. So they come more or less as you expect. People don't like to shoot from down on the corners, not, on the half wall a little bit, but not high on the boards. And so that's just what you would think. But that's just the geometry I'm using with no details yet about results. We'll get to results that'll be in that shape. Slap shots follow a pattern further back, obviously, with a little bit flare out there just by the corners and the circles. The backhands. So again, this is 95-96% of all of the shots that have been taken recently, all situations. So the backhands, they go lower. There's more along the goal line there. Over the tops of the circles, people basically just don't take backhand shots. There's not a great deal of point in it. And then tips and deflections come, like you'd think, almost entirely, not just between the dots, but really, really very close to the slot itself. So then I wanted to include some details. It's another sort of weakness of a lot of analytical things that people have been doing recently, and I am the guiltiest of all of this, is focusing exclusively on even strength. And when you're talking about the team aspects of the sport, where lots and lots of people figure, it's natural to focus on 5 and 5 as a particular thing, and then to look at the other things as their own special things, because after all, there's special coaches for those things, there's special game plans, there's literally special rules. But the conception that I was going with here is I was trying to understand that shot creation and shot suppression, the team aspects of the sport, as everything that was already done. And then after that, once somebody had decided to take a shot, then I wanted to capture, okay, now what's going to happen, because it's so-and-so who takes that shot from that spot and not someone else. So after the decision to shoot has already been taken, so all of the playmaking is done. And so you crystallize everything you know about the play at that instant. You take that and you turn it into what I'm calling the XG. And then the shooters have their own control after that, because some people shoot well and some people shoot poorly. And then the goalies have their own impact on that afterwards, because some goalies save well and some goalies save not so well. And so this is one of the typical problems with so many models, is that lots of the things that you include are not interesting themselves. They're proxies for something that you can't get a hold of. So literally shooting the puck, there's nothing about the action of the stick on the puck that has anything to do with whether or not there are 5 skaters on the other team or 4 skaters on the other team. But those things proxy well for things that matter to whether or not you can put the puck in the net. Like, are you being immediately pressured? Which clearly matters for how many opponents you have on the ice. How much pre-shot movement can you generate? Well, we don't have the kind of data we want, and us, schmucks in the public might not ever get the kind of data, the tracking data that we were all supposed to be drooling over by now. But pre-shot movement is clearly a thing, and if you get more of it, you should be able to take better shots, and that's clearly relevant to the strength situation you're playing at. So all of these things, I don't expect them to intrinsically affect probabilities. I expect them to proxy for things that affect goal likelihoods. So But then after that, so I decided to take as my reference case even strength, by which I meant 4-on-4 and 5-on-5. I decided to model 3-on-3 separately, and you'll see why once you see the results. Then there were normal power plays, so 5-on-4s obviously, but also 6-on-5s. So it's not a penalty situation. Normally 6-on-5s goalie pulls, but there are more of you than there are of them. And then what I did, for lack of a better phrase, for the moment I'm calling good power plays, which is power plays where the other team only has 3 players. And something to my surprise, 4-on-3 power plays shared a lot more in common with 5-on-3 power plays than they did with 5-on-4s. And so having one extra skater is nice, but them only having 3 people, that seems to be considerably more meaningful. And then all of the short-handed shots I decided to gather together just because I could. Then there's other things that you really want. What we'd really love to have, what I would love to have, is something about odd man rushes, quantifying breakaways specifically, 2-on-1s, in the fullness of time when all worlds are complete. Wouldn't we love to know, who is defending that 2-on-1, like those kinds of details. But we don't have that kind of details right now, but we can, with the play-by-play data that we've got, we can proxy that stuff again. We can talk about rushes. So that's shots that are taken within 3 seconds of a shot from the other, of an event from another zone. Rebounds, so that's shots that are taken within 4 seconds of the previous event, which must also be a shot by the same team. So 4 seconds is actually reasonably generous. So that's not necessarily just the goalie touched it and then somebody got to the puck. It's a little broader than that. And then I wanted to try to account for the fact that teams actually change their play. Now, my older work on shot rates has a lot to do with score effects. And if any of you were privy to my Herculean effort to merely appear on the stage in Columbus when I was talking constantly about score effects, one of the things that I discovered there that's going to recur is that leading teams are the ones who appear to be dominating score effects in terms of shot rates. And that is consistent with what I'm seeing now for shooting talent as well. So we'll see that that again is a proxy. Just because the score is different doesn't mean you put your stick on the puck any differently, or doesn't mean you, as a goalie, that you save the puck differently. But it does affect how many bodies are likely to be behind the puck. It does affect what sort of traffic you're going to have to fight through to get through to the net. And so I'm hoping to proxy some of that stuff, even though I can't quantify it directly. But then, of course, the point of the whole apparatus is to quantify goalie and shooter talent. And so I need to have terms in my model, one for every goalie and one for every shooter. And I'm not enforcing any minimums. So I have some sneaky mathematical tricks to get useful estimates for guys, even who played hardly anything at all. And we'll see how in a second. So in principle, I should be able to get some amusing but completely nonsensical estimate of somebody, like David Ayers' goaltender ability. If I had any good sense, I would have highlighted it for amusement's sake, but I did not. So there's only one technical slide, and it's not even that technical. See, I even deleted all the formulas. But the model itself, those are all of the pieces. That's all the ingredients that go into the soup. And so the regression that I fit, so it's a curve fitting thing. You're trying to find the estimates of the player abilities that are most consistent with the data that you see. But in addition to fitting the data, we're also going to fit a bunch of prior information in. And so those are penalties in a technical sense that encode what we already know when we make the model. So we're going to say, it's funny actually, my wife today decided to spend her afternoon making herself a dress form. And so she covered herself in duct tape and then cut it off. And now she's stuffed it with a pillowcase, and she's going to use it to make clothes for herself. So she's literally fitting fabric that she is constructing for her own stuff. And so penalties in this sense says, well, it can't fit too badly through here or else I can't wear it. It can't fit too badly through there or else it won't look good. And so you're adding things ahead of time if you're giving instructions to someone who's going to, for instance, make clothes to you. So in this sense, we're giving instructions to the computer. We're saying, this is the data that we want. And we want a thing that has to come out that has to look like an expected goals model. But also, it can't do this, it can't do this, it can't do this. And so you try to accommodate all those things, and maybe they conflict, but you can still minimize how much you violate those assumptions, just like you minimize how wrong the model is when you fit it to the data that you've got, that this guy took this many shots and scored that many goals. And so you want an estimate that's consistent with all of that. And so the biases are that you put in is that you bias the shooter and goalie estimates towards 0. So which we're notionally taking 0 as the NHL average. So we're going to interpret all of our coefficients as from that 0 point. And so that's that's encoding our prior understanding that all of the players who play in the NHL are NHL players by definition. There's the old every appointment I have is a doctor's appointment because I'm a doctor joke. And that's something that we're saying, that we know that, that like superhuman players don't just appear, that they have characteristics that make them similar to existing distributions of talent. And then sneakily, all of those hexagons where we're using for our location data, we're going to bias them to be close to one another. So if you take a shot from two adjacent hexagons, that can be different, but it can't be too different. After all, those spots on the ice are right next to one another, so we know that they should be the same. And then because I'm being extra sneaky and fitting this in 13 separate regressions, one for every year, I can feed in the results of the previous year into the next year and say, well, this is so-and-so, this is Taylor Hall's shooting ability. We know how good he was, and so how good he is now should at least be, obviously people can change, but my assumption is that they change slowly, so that I'm going to bias all of the results towards the old results a little, as well as biasing them to the data of what they put up from the following year, so that the results that they put together, the estimate that we get out at the end of their ability is not just this is how good they did this year, it's our estimate of how good we think they are this instant based on the most recent data and also based on what they've done in the past. So all of those biases, you can think of it like this enormous welt of rubber bands. We're going to try to squeeze the data into the best shape we can with all of those constraints at the same time. And precisely what you need to do to torture a computer to produce the right answer for that is what they pay me the big bucks for. And the big bucks are not particularly big. But they do put food on the children, and the results you get are these. So I've made you wait until only halfway through this talk to give you any results at all, and so here you are some. So this is the fabric I showed you already about what hexes we were using for wrist shots and snapshots, and so now the results for that is more or less what you'd expect. The darker colors here mean more likely to be a goal, and so this is the regression that I ran for this season, shortened as it was. And so the darker hexes right in front of goal, like you'd expect, are the ones where your base chance of scoring when you shoot from those spots is between 25 and 30%. Those three darkest hexes, and so it drops off pretty sharply as you get outside the dots. Those shots do occasionally go in, and so you see those percentages of around 5 or 6%. But of course, those aren't high quality shots. And so you start to distinguish that. So that's wrist and snapshots. This is the fabric for slap shots. And here it's even less surprising, where if you're taking a big slap shot from right in the slot, then you have a decent chance. But slap shots from the points almost never go in clean. They're constantly missed. Oh, and I should have said before that when I say shot, I'm not saying just saves and goals. I'm using saves and goals and misses, because I'm trying to make sure that I get a handle on shooter talent, which includes the ability to not miss the puck. To take a shot is to squander possession unless you can make something good come out of it, right? And so generating rebounds obviously is good. And that we'll catch a little part of that later on. But more to the point, I wanted to include misses because if you're missing constantly, then you're not a good shooter. So this is the fabric for backhands, and so this is these I tweaked them a little bit to make them symmetric, but like I said before, these are just 96, 97% data coverage. So just almost all of the backhands come from this area. But when you look at the results, you see that the ones that go in are clustered very tightly in front of the net. And also, if you might have noticed before on the wrist shots, we saw that one cell on the goalie's left was particularly stronger right in front of net than on the goalie's right. And we see that pattern again here, where the three cells, obviously the three cells dead in front are good. The three cells to the goaltender's left, your right, if you're looking at it, are a little bit stronger than the three cells to the goaltender's right, your left. So I'm not, I have some suspicion that there's some curiosity about handedness there, possibly shooter handedness, but even more likely goalie handedness, because so many more goalies catch left-handed. So there's some sort of glove hand weakness there for backhand specifically, and possibly also for wrist hands. I don't want to go too far on that. I'd have to really investigate that more before I could say, this is a real thing. There was an old joke in analytic circles that the book on, anytime a goalie would let in a goal, they would say, oh, the book on that goalie is high glove side. No matter who the goalie was, it was always the same book. So tips and deflections. have this pattern covering the slot like you might think, but the places where the goal's from, again, like you'd expect, are very tightly to the front of the net. Although you see a little bit of extension there in the darkness out towards the high slot where the high tips, when they're dead in front, give you a little bit of possibility. So that's just the location stuff. And then of course, I said I was gonna have wraparounds, but I don't, because it turns out that, this is one of those things that's super obvious, but I decided not to take it for granted. I looked into it. Wraparounds only happen in 2 places. And so there isn't any interesting geometry to where do you take a wraparound from. Those shots come from the posts. And it turns out that nothing I can do with the data that I've got, possibly nothing I can do ever, can show me that some types of wraparounds are better than other types of wraparounds. So it turns out that it was easier there just to use a single indicator for wraparounds, and they don't get to have a beautiful picture covered with hexagons. So let's actually have some results. So this is a little bit hasty. I just clipped this today. I put this whole talk together in a handful of days. And thank you, Megan, in particular, for putting it all together, however quickly I may have done so. So this is just save percentage, 5-on-5 save percentage, just the goalies at the very top this year for save percentage. So Anton Khudobin is well ahead of the others at 5-on-5 save percentage, and he got a lot of attention for that as well. Tuukka Rask, just behind him. And part of one of the things that motivated me to do this is that if you look at the shots that the Bruins give up, they're so much easier, or so it would appear, than a lot of the shots that some other goalies are having to face. And so I wanted to, you wanted to try to take that into account. So Hellebuck, for instance, you see him just a little bit further down, still on the center line there. His save percentage is not nearly as good, but not nearly as good as Rask's, although, nothing wrong with a 93% save percentage. But also, you have a handful of surprises, like Tristan Jarry maybe is a surprise to some. Mackenzie Blackwood is new this year, is surprising to some. Francouz is a little bit surprising. Corey Crawford will be a surprise to some, but not others. Merz Leakins, of course, had that tremendous run in that section today for Columbus. But that's just save percentage. And so one of the things I wanted to contrast that with was what kind of estimate do you get out of isolating their behavior from their impact from their shot difficulty. And so then if you do the same thing, this is now the data from the model that I've been telling you about all this time. Now you see Hellebuck come way to the top because the shots he's facing are so difficult by comparison. The Kemper, who was high, is still high. Crawford comes up a little bit higher. The Rask is still high, but not nearly so high up at the top. The Khudobin is also still high, just not, we're not seeing anything that's super counterintuitive. We're not saying, oh, this goalie who has a 94% save percentage, actually he's bad. We're not saying anything like this. But we do see a lot of rearrangements. In particular, Lundqvist is nowhere on this save percentage stuff. He's not close to the top of the league in save percentage. In fact, he's very close to league average in save percentage. But if you account for the difficulty of the shots that he's facing, even in this reasonably crude way, I tried to outline some of the places where we were using proxies for what we really wanted. Now Lundqvist all of a sudden is in the top handful of goalies in the league, the top 10 or 15 or so, as well as Shesterkin. So that's New York for you. And so that's and the units here, of course, are different. These units are odds ratio percentages. So this is saying that Hellebuck, whatever the odds are of a shot going in, if you have no idea who is trying to save it, as soon as you know it's Hellebuck, your odds just went down by 10 or 11%. Odds are really useful for this because they never run out. You can say your odds are 1,000 to 1 or 10,000 to 1. No matter how high you say, that's still a useful number, whereas probabilities cap out at 0 and 1, which makes them mathematically awkward. So the guts of the math is all done in terms of odds. And so if you're a degenerate, then you might be more at home. And then the bottom of the goalies this year, so having a great defense in front of you can make you look bad as well if you're accounting for shot difficulty. So Devan Dubnyk, who has played in front of a tremendous defense this year, has the worst performance this year and one of the worst ability estimates that I've seen in quite some while. On the other hand, you can also have a dreadful year as a goaltender and have a terrible defense in front of you, like Jimmy Howard did this year. And so, that's how you get the kind of historically bad season that the Red Wings were on their way to having, is that if you have your skaters play very badly and also have your starting goalie play very badly. And there's the, it's not a single story that you can tell. The idea, if you like, behind analytics of analyzing, of tearing things apart, is to try to isolate specific things that, and so I always get a crack when people say, oh, analytics doesn't paint the whole picture of this. The point is not to paint a whole picture. That's some other thing. Analytics is about putting your finger on specific details, and then you take your specific details and then you put them into a bigger picture. But once you do that, then you're not doing analytics anymore. You're doing some other kind of thing, some other kind of synthetic gadget. So moving on to forwards, anybody who's watched anything out of Boston this year will have seen how Pasternak is putting everything in the net. He appears at this instant to be the best pure shooter in the league. So not about creating chances, but about finishing them. Another reason why I wanted to attack this kind of problem is that I wanted to validate a little bit of the pushback I saw from people who say, you can't say that this player is, among the better players in the league just because of their impact on shot rates. And shot rates are like the bread and butter of analytics, and for good reason, but shot rates is a very sort of middle sixy like thing to worry about when like the whole game is taken together is a lot more than that. And so I wanted to look at one of the pieces that was more in line with conventional wisdom. So in particular, shooting, literally putting the puck in the net. And so the sort of earliest attempts at this, just looking at something like shooting percentage, were beset by the fact that it bounces around so much that looking at pure shooting percentage is extremely unreliable as an indicator of talent. And so that's part of why we've had to go to these more sophisticated mathematical methods to actually isolate something, and it still moves around quite a bit, more than I would have expected, even with all of the penalties and biases that I put in to try to sort of keep it under control. And so, we're getting some idea about how much individual ability, how much individual impact actually does vary. But on the whole, part of why I've let this slide linger is that with a few exceptions, it's pretty much a who's who of all-stars in the league, the better forward shooters in the league. And almost all of these players are marquee players that the fans of their team would know extremely well. Although, my sort of analytics heart can't help but think, notice a couple little details, and say like a guy like Nola Chari or a guy like Mike Hoffman, who's there in the top handful of guys in the league, and say, that's a specific talent that I appreciate. So, and then I should mention just before we finish up some of the other details, I added in all those terms, which are important, to move them out of the side so that you can laser in on what you really care about, but you also have them. And so power plays increase your odds of a particular shot being a goal, the same shot from the same spot by a fair bit. Shorthanded, to my surprise, increases them by about the same amount. Power play versus 3, I mentioned before that playing against only 3 players when you have more than 3 helps a lot. Plus 109%, so you're doubling your odds of scoring on a particular shot when you're playing against only 3 people. That's telling you that there's something going on here, a lot going on here with skater defense, even about shooters. This is before goalies interpose themselves. And then, to my surprise, also, that part I wasn't too surprised at. But the 3-on-3 impact of being that high, so 50, almost 60% more impact on goal odds for both teams when you're 3-on-3, which again is consistent with what we see. The shots at 3-on-3 are a bit more fewer and far between. People are a little bit more sparing in their choices, and it shows. Getting a shot off the rush helps a lot. Getting a shot off a rebound helps a lot. And then connecting up with that thought that I mentioned before about score effects is we see that trailing changes your goal odds by 8%. And so just going back to the goalies here, 8%, that's the difference between Kemper or Bishop, at second and third best at this moment in the league, and average. So being the team who is trailing somehow changes your goal odds from a particular spot changes your goal odds as if you were facing a league average goaltender to as if you were facing one of the best goalies in the league. So that effect of the score itself, precisely how that happens, I'm not sure, but it's actually reasonably substantial. So the next things is to take all of this thing and then rework it. I put future in quotes there because I've actually done half this, but I've already hit 30 minutes, and I won't be talking for another 2 hours about the next model and the next model and the next model, but the work continues unabated, and so we'll get to that probably next week or the week afterwards. We might have a sequence of calls. Certainly there'll be plenty of stuff on my website. So that's all I had to say to you about all of this. I'm sorry if I talk too much or too fast or too long. You should feel free to follow me on Twitter if you don't already, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you all about it. Thanks a lot.
And what is your website? How do we find it? And because we'll post this link later, so just if people want to learn about you more, what will you be doing on the off season when there's not as much hockey, and it could be a long off season?
Well, it could be a lot of an off season, and this model I have been working on for several months. And normally I would, in fact, I had just sort of started to put it off to the side, hoping that I would pick it back up in when the summer came. But then the summer came with a vengeance, and so I picked it back up. And so it's published these, not these slides, but a longer article explaining this model, as well as all of my other work, is published on hockeyviz.com. That's viz.com. And as you may know, the website is partially a subscriber website. Lots of it is free, so if you don't subscribe, don't worry about that. You'll find lots and lots of stuff. But if you want to, if you click on something that's just for subscribers, it'll give you a link. And if you pay me $5 a month, and the links there will follow you through, then you'll get access to all of the fancier stuff. And there's tools. Among other things, there's going to be a tool that I've half made where you can actually use this model that I was just talking about and create your own shot. At this spot from a wrist shot, which was a rebound, but not a rush, and you can find a probability. So there'll be a toy that you can play with, or a tool that you can use depending on your taste for description, probably in the next 2 or 3 days.
Awesome. And I see 1 or 2 hands up from the group. Allison, do you have any way to find the questions? Maybe you can take 1 or 2 questions while you're here.
Yeah, I know. Let me look here. Laura Daly had a question. I know she was maybe going to reach out after, but let me find it. Micah, Laura was curious if the 5 versus 3 or 4 versus 3 thing, she says, is due to space on ice.
That's my assumption. I don't know, but that was a real surprise to me when I. First of all, I just threw all of the different things into different piles to just see what they all looked like. Even if that was a bit noisy, and I expected to put the 4-on-3 stuff into the 5-on-4 stuff, but instead put it with the 5-on-3 stuff instead because of how similar it was. And I'm starting to think that having extra people is considerably less valuable than your opponent having fewer. And I think it is for ice space reasons, that once you have that space, and that's consistent with what we see with that 3-on-3 term as well, and what we just watched with 3-on-3, that it's also a little bit trickier too, because players play differently. Like at 3-on-3, we see players take the puck back over the blue line. We just don't ever see that at 5-on-4 in particular. So the two things kind of feed into one another. Is that because players are mentally treating the game differently? We'll see that. Or is it because there's just more space to exploit, and so they exploit it? So it could be one or the other, but I heavily agree.
Great. And our second question is from Brian. And his question is, do you think that blocked shots might account for more of the bigger difference 4 versus 3 players? Yeah,
it could be. And so I didn't actually include blocked shots in my analysis. If we had locations for blocked shots that were more than just where they were blocked from, that included where they were shot from, I think I would be tempted to. And then maybe I could have added in some extra details. Like, I didn't show you any stuff about defenders, but I would love to be able to look at where defenders get shots through and which defenders have their shots blocked. But I think it fits in with what I was saying in answer to Laura's question too, that that just space on the ice, in particular space in between the person shooting the puck and the person trying to save it, when we say space, we mean open space, right? And so if there's a player in the way who's gonna block it, then what you do to get around that block generally makes your shot not as good. So if there's a player putting pressure on you, then you'll say, oh, well, I'll just shoot it over here to make sure it doesn't get blocked, and now you miss. Like that. Those kinds of causal details are so obvious that it feels like that kind of impact probably does show up even in the work that I'm doing, which doesn't include the blocked shot specifically.
Gotcha. Awesome. I think that's all we have. And again, that reminder, if you have questions as we go through, if you can tweet them with the hashtag HANIC, we'll ask them of our presenters at the end of their time. Okay,
perfect. And let me see if I'm guessing ACT is Andrew Thomas, I'm hoping.
Yes.
It is.
Let me see if I can do you have your video up? There we go.
You can see me. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I'll make it a spotlight video. Awesome.
Hey. Hello.
I'm sorry we were a little later than expected. I mean, I was up to 300 people, but it's tough because some people don't put their full name either. So you kind of have to guess that, you're going to behave. But we got everyone here, it seemed like, that knows each other. So should be good. So we were talking earlier about, stats, starting a website. How do you even begin? Kind of like rewinding, obviously, your career, because I think a lot of people are kind of at that stage, right, where they're either in college or they want to get into hockey analytics. I'm sure you get this question 24/7. How did you initially think to start a website? And if you could go back in time, what did you think was most advantageous, both in schooling and in sort of outside the classroom learning?
So let me start at the very beginning of for me, I started working on hockey analytics stuff when I was a grad student in statistics back in 2004. So I've been in this space a long time. And when I was there, I was already kind of building tools and things that I was going to need later. So when I had students, when I became a professor, I had students who were wanting to do work in this. And believe it or not, there are a lot who are very willing to do things just because it's fun. I'm sure this is why you're all here on a Saturday night after all. So one of the things that came up there was we had students who wanted to look into, I had Sam Ventura, who was a student of mine at the time. We wanted to look at some things that were going on with some of the models that predated what Micah was doing. And so the very first thing we did was kind of go over the existing literature, and most of that was just academic speak for what some of these same things that Micah will have on a single slide that says technical slide details here, but in this case, they'll fill a full paper. So what we did at that point was put together our own scraping software, our own language. I was an R person, I still am, to build all the tools that we needed to start with at that point. And then having the toolkit to begin with made it easier to start asking later questions. So to come back to your other question of what prompted us to start a website, there's two parts to that answer. The first is we wanted to share kind of our results that we had done from this paper. So we'd done a similar regression-based model in 2013 that wasn't really getting a lot of press. So I started releasing some things on Twitter around early April, I guess, of 2014. And at that point, we decided, okay, let's just go ahead and make a website out of it because people will pay more attention to that than peer-reviewed literature. And then Daryl Metcalf got hired by the Leafs, and everyone around us said, well, clearly a website's going to get you a hockey job, so let's do that. What had much happened, I don't know, I was already gainfully employed at that point as a professor, which is a life very exciting, as I'm sure you all know. But the other piece of it there was we were thinking, well, even if, is it possible, we didn't know for a week what had happened to Daryl's site, extraskater.com. At the time we thought, well, maybe he'd been shut down by the league for using data without permission. And then it turned out he'd been hired by the Leafs, and we figured it's exactly the opposite, that he was praised for putting together a site of that type. So Sam and I talked to a number of other people who were in the community at that point. I know Gianluca Costello was one we were in direct contact with, who was also putting out similar kinds of things and wondering what can be built. And so was Matt Pfeffer, who was with Nashville for a while, is now in another job in soccer, I believe, in MLS. And because we'd already built a number of the existing tools that we had done for our research, it was fairly easy for us to scale that up into pieces that we needed to do to put up what became War on Ice within a few weeks. So it helped that we'd already built the existing things and we knew kind of what we wanted to do. And the timing was just there that it happened that we could drop in almost immediately.
And how do you feel like that, like the progression has changed? Because obviously there was that sort of that, influx of people with certain skill sets. What do you think is most important now for, learning, whether it's R, Python? I feel like it's getting more specialized as well, right? More software engineers, different types of skill sets that complement each other instead of someone being a generalist. What's your perspective on where students maybe should focus, or someone that wants to break into the industry?
Well, I think pretty much anybody who wants to break into the industry or wants to just do something with this should pick one thing and start with that. I mean, 'cause that's what we had done originally. The very first thing that we had done that was going to become War on Ice was it was basically hexagonally based maps, because Micah and I both love hexagons. Hexagonally based maps for shot volume from various points around the ice, a lot like what you'd seen with Micah's product. That one thing that we focused on to start with just felt like, okay, that's a product with enough scope that we didn't feel like we were diving into everything all at once. We knew that we could get what we needed to from R very quickly in order to put together those tools, as well as some of the software to be able to share it online. I'd already been using it with student presentations in my class. So I'd only taken a few extra steps to build something at a minimum viable product scale that was enough to get out there for everybody. And I'd say in the last few years, everybody that I've seen who's made kind of an impact in that space has done something similar. They've started with one thing that's their project, that's their baby, that they're excited about. They go out there, they build it, and they share it. And then they see what comes of that. And if they feel like building more on top of that, like the Youngren twins did with Evolving Wild, they started with one thing and then built that up. Megan Hall with her, she started with, I don't know if she actually started with pulling the goalie, but it's the first thing I saw of hers, which is a pet, not necessarily peeve of mine, but it's another interest of mine. So it got my attention as well. Pretty much everybody that I know started with one thing and built it and loved building it. Whatever their software package or problem of interest happened to be, it was starting with something tractable that you either weren't doing too little or too much.
So in 2020, what do you think are some of the questions that are like the low-lying fruit in hockey? Obviously, the pulling the goalie, people have done some face-offs, expected goals, shots, passes. What's sort of next on your radar that you think maybe someone could dig into?
Without revealing what kind of data is available to them, that's definitely the biggest challenge. I'd say, I mean, in general, the two biggest, toughest areas of the game to study, as far as I can tell, are defense and goaltending. So I know that a lot of people have put effort into collecting their own data on this, which is great. Largely anything that's being done at the event level might be missing some of the context that you need to do some things that are more involved when it comes to one player within 5 doing something. It's more difficult. It's not impossible. So if someone was going to take like another public project, like I know like a lot of people have been collecting data on passes and entries and everything, and it's fantastic. If people wanted to collect their own data, I'd say pick something. I'm actually surprised that people haven't done more in-depth studies on goaltending by collecting their own data. Like just doing shot charts, or doing goalie mapping. Like we have access right now to an entire thing through NHL TV where the goalie is going to be in frame for the most part. I'm a little surprised that no one, well, it's a lot of work, so I'm not all that surprised. But for all the data collection efforts that have gone out there, there are 60 shots on goal per game on average. I find it funny that no one that I have talked to, that's not to say it hasn't been done, but no one I've talked to has explicitly mapped out the position of the goalie for some sample of shots just to get a handle on what the data for that looks like. So I would expect that one of the easier frontiers for someone who wants to dive in and collect their own data is just looking at that aspect of goalie measurement for a game.
And from my perspective, that's a bit of a leading question because Kat's actually talking about goaltending next.
Hey,
so
Kat.
It's a great segue. But Allison, if there's any other questions for Andrew while we have him up, that'd be perfect.
None for Andrew. You did such a good job already answering everything.
Amazing.
Or I'm just going to answer nothing. So.
No, we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for putting this on, by the way.
Well, it sort of worked. I mean, we're getting through it now, which is always good, but you know.
We got down to the good people. I say
There we go. The good things, right?
I say that to all the people who are watching later on the replay. You're not the good people. I can't. You're all, if you're paying attention to this sincerely, you're all wonderful people.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us.